Hello and welcome to the Feminine as Fuck podcast. I'm your host, Monica Yates, a period and women's life coach, where I help women to harness the power of their period and connect back to their true superpowers. In these episodes, we'll be talking about all things periods, vaginas, hormones, women's health, sex, confidence, food, femininity, and all the stuff that goes through our heads. You will walk away from each episode with new nuggets and truth bombs, as I don't seem to have a filter and I love talking about all the shit that people are too afraid to say, but everyone is thinking.
Hello, everybody. This is not a period-related podcast episode, not a feminine-related episode at all. I have my beautiful dad here, and we're going to have a conversation after the election that just happened in Australia. And even if you are not interested, I would listen to this just because as a young person, I know majority of us are not very well educated around politics and what actually goes on with the election and whatnot. A lot of us choose not to listen to the news because we're aware of how much changing goes on and how much fear is placed in our mind. However, then we don't really get much education about this. And this election really kind of affects our generation and Mother Earth. So this is my dad, everybody, Oliver Yates.
G'day, everybody. It's the first time I've done one of these, Monica.
It's fun. So, Dad, can you please give us the rundown on what sort of went on yesterday and just how the election, how it really works when people get in? Because I know that, obviously Liberals got in for all of Australia. And, how is that then different to, the state thing? Give us the basics.
Well, look, yesterday we had a federal election, which is for the government that looks after us in relation to federal matters. Obviously, each state has its own parliament and has state politicians there. So this was a federal election where we choose a new government, and the government then goes about selecting the new Prime Minister, for want of a better word. It was a bit of a shock election for most people. The outcome's been a bit of a shock. Certainly all polls and forecasters were not expecting the outcome that's been that's actually resulted. So it's quite a surprise to most people, and I think most people, or many people who would be concerned about the state of the planet and climate change would actually feel quite distraught at the outcome today.
Yeah, I was crying to my kinesiology appointment because I was so upset. Okay, so why was the outcome so different to what we predicted?
Well, I guess statistically, it wasn't expected that the Liberal government would actually be able to secure enough seats to remain in. And as we know, it's been the current Liberal government which has done nothing on climate change. So every year this government has been in operation in Australia, Australia's emissions have increased. So there's not a single year that they have been in government when Australia's emissions, which are the things that we need to worry about in terms of dealing with climate change, haven't actually increased, when it is an absolute imperative that they decrease very rapidly if we are to avoid catastrophic climate change. This isn't just serious climate change. We're now talking about catastrophic climate change. Serious climate change is now almost inevitable, which is mass extinctions, loss of the Great Barrier Reef. That's already
mostly gone anyway.
Well, that's the current reality that many of your listeners will be facing, and now we're talking about a government still doing nothing, which is basically painting a picture even worse than that. Which I can't imagine anything worse than that anyway.
I know. So why do they get in when they're going to do jack shit?
Well, I guess unfortunately, a lot of it comes around to people voting in accordance with their individual self-interest.
Right.
So if people only put their own self-interest into perspective, then arguably, half the current generation could do nothing on the basis that the next generation will be lumbered with massive problems and they'll be gone. So people were enticed or fearful of the Labor government, which was likely to come in because the Liberal government ran an effective smear and negative campaign, a very negative campaign against anything that the Labor government was suggesting. So it was
what does that mean?
Campaign.
They were saying bad things about the Labor government.
Yeah, well, the Labor government, unlike most situations, actually tried to be honest and transparent with people. it put out its policies of what it thought was appropriate.
Yeah.
And the Liberal government, rather than offering any policies of its own, just went and attacked anything.
They seem to do a good job of attacking other parties.
Well, that's all they do. They have nothing to offer. So they've decided that negative politics is successful. And unfortunately, the outcome here would prove that negative politics seems to work. But unfortunately, that's terrible for a country, because a country can't move forward if we're going to operate from an environment where negative politics is the only way.
There's just so much negativity.
Yeah. So it's actually very disappointing for everybody.
Okay, so how's it going to affect us? So my generation, I'm 22, maybe from like everybody around my age, younger, and maybe up to like their 30s. How is this going to affect us?
Well, at the moment, the Liberal government has said that they are going to do nothing in relation to climate change. They're going to continue on with their current policies, and those current policies will not address climate change in any meaningful way.
So what's his name? Josh Frydenberg, the guy in our electorate.
Yeah.
So he didn't put anything out, not that he would necessarily act on it, because he hasn't in the past, but he didn't put anything out about climate change.
Well, what they put out was a government policy called a climate solutions package, which is not a solution at all. It's a nothing package. And
right.
They put that out before the budget, which is when the government sets its spending criteria. And to manipulate the budget, actually, Josh decided to defund half of the money that was meant to be in that package, which was designed to try and take some action, but that's not.
What does defund mean in that package?
Take the money out.
To do what?
Well, basically, he said we were going to do X, and we have all this money to do X, and then before the budget came out, and he basically took the money away. So you make a big announcement to say, "Oh, Monica, I'm going to give you, $100 million to do something," and then what you do is you say 3 weeks later, you say, "Well, here's my budget. Oh, yes, well, we couldn't give you the $100 million, Monica. I'm giving you $20 million now." But I don't talk about that because I made a nice big announcement 3 weeks ago that I was giving you $100 million.
So basically, misleading and deceptive conduct.
Well, I wouldn't say that's misleading and deceptive conduct. It's just
lying,
par for course. No, that's not. That's mild in comparison to what we've seen during this election campaign.
Right. So, what are some of the things that we've seen?
Well,
I want to quickly preface everybody. The reason my dad was such an important candidate to do this and to win was because he is he's the expert in climate change and renewables, and he's got a background in both that and also the economy stuff. I mean, you can give a quick explanation of that. I'm not very good with this stuff. Why were you the best in terms of making an impact on this? And then we'll jump back to what was really going on with this election.
Sure. So my background is I'm a finance person. So I've been in banking all of my life, international banking. And for the last, 15 years, I've been involved in financing in the renewable energy space. Yeah. And for the last, 5 years, I guess I was the CEO of Australia's Green Bank. So they have a green bank in Australia with $10 billion in it, which I started and I ran on behalf of the government as the CEO, where we made lots and lots of investments in renewables. Yeah. I'm also was on the board of Climate Works Australia, which actually helps you forecast the type of carbon pathway you need, or the carbon reduction amount. So when I talk about carbon pathways, if there are any words that I talk about that you don't understand, you need to jump.
What's carbon pathways?
Well, if you're trying to go from an economy which is burning so much carbon or emitting so much carbon to another place where you're emitting a lot less, you need a road to get it. Yeah. So to get it from one place to another, and that's called the carbon pathway. Okay. Is how do I get from one part
A to B?
From a high emissions economy to a low emissions economy. Okay. I need a path to go and do it. So that was a group that actually looked at how you actually found a pathway to get from A to B as cheaply as possible, because people want to actually reduce emissions and they want to do it as cheaply as possible, which
and
is
also
fine.
Like I was saying to some people yesterday when we were doing the polls of we want to be playing, I think our generation's a bit better at this, but we want to be playing the long-term game, right? And so it's even though, in my eyes, even though we might have to pay a little bit more for the renewables now, if that's the case, in the long term, we'll be paying nothing for them. What was the last bill on this house?
Ours is generally about $30 a month for electricity.
Yeah, so nothing. There was one point where it was less than a coffee. It was something. Yeah. It was $1 something or other.
It was low because we got 15 kilowatts of solar on the roof.
Yeah, so if we all had that, it'd be a good one. Anyway, thank you for explaining that, Dad. Back to what was really going on behind the scenes with some of the stuff that was happening this election. Yeah,
well, I guess the question is when a government's running a negative campaign, what they do is they try and criticise anything that anybody has done or is doing or has done in their past. So to be able to do that, they come up with a whole bundle of claims. and most of those claims were either misleading or misleading claims about, it's all going to be damaging, it's all going to be bad, or you've done this or you've done that. And they dress them up, which is the reason why they look deceptive. And so they either make you look bad or they make your suggested policies look bad in a way which is designed to deceive the voter. Now, you'd think, in the commercial world, you all know if you're in business that you can be sued if you sell a product and you are misleading and deceptive.
Yeah, it's misleading and deceptive conduct. It's a full law.
That's right. But in politics...
It doesn't apply.
Well, actually, in politics, it absolutely doesn't apply. And what's more, the Liberal government, when they were questioned on this, their lawyers came back to us and said, oh, by the way, we expressly assert our right to be misleading and deceptive.
How is that even, humanly allowed?
They chose to make it allowed.
Humans?
They chose to make that allowed. There was an issue last election campaign where someone sent a text around saying the government was going to cut back our healthcare system, an email an SMS text, which was called the MiniScare. The government brought in, was going to bring in rules to address that. The way they chose to address that was actually in a way which still allowed them to be misleading and deceptive. So they knew that there was a problem with this issue of being totally misleading and deceptive, and they chose to draft the legislation in a way which would enable them to be misleading and deceptive before the election. So I'm surprised. I'm genuinely surprised.
How do these people fucking sleep at night?
Well, I'm genuinely surprised because I didn't believe that there was any expressed view that one would undertake activities that are misleading and deceptive. They've said that yes, there is. You can be misleading and deceptive, and we're all good with that. The problem that they've got is, I've been looking into it a little bit more, there's a ministerial code of conduct for their staff. Their staff are the ones who are actually going out and talking about this as well. When they know it is misleading and deceptive, I don't know how they can possibly have... These are taxpayer-funded staff.
So
they are paid
my
for by
money
us,
is
your money
paying
for people
for them
to be actively
dickheads.
To be actively misleading and deceiving.
Wow.
The people who are paying them. So this gets really quite
all
ugly.
The volunteers yesterday were also paid. Sorry, not volunteers, and they would have been employees.
Well, some of them were paid because they were volunteers who were paid, but there are other members of the staff that we were dealing with. The challenger we were dealing with has 37 staff in his office, and some of those are undertaking activities which are unbecoming of any person who is in the public service. So I think the Public Service Commission, which is the body that's meant to be regulating how people we pay for to operate for the government should operate, should be reviewing all of this. Actually,
it should not be allowed. It's not fair.
Exactly. Why we are paying as taxpayers for staff to mislead and deceive.
I know.
The very
I would like
people
my
who are
taxes
paying
to
for
go to
them.
the environment. Thank you very much.
Well, So I'm surprised. I'm genuinely surprised. So that's where I think this whole comment about the name of the podcast has come from.
Yeah, Dad. I said to Dad this morning, we were we were having a little debrief after yesterday, and I said, Dad, you should start a podcast because, as you guys would already have seen or heard, he's such a good speaker. So his podcast is going to be called Tip of the Iceberg, and then the slogan is what's really going on beneath the surface.
Yeah, and I think the issue is that I think I know quite a lot and I've been around a lot, but when you go into different areas, you can find that you're in very alien territory, which I've never seen it. So I've never seen the conduct that I saw from these people in my business career over 30 years. I had, on the election campaign yesterday, 2 members of ministerial staff following me and harassing me during the day, following me from polling station to polling station, harassing me, and even though I asked them to desist, they would continue to follow you from polling station, and as you walked around, follow you and continue to mouth off things which were clearly misleading and deceptive.
Were they the 2 girls that were then saying bad things about me?
They were the 2 girls, yeah.
Yeah, I know.
It's fun. And I asked the relevant minister whether he would kindly ask his staff to stop this harassment, and he said no. So
they were ruthless. They were girls my age, ruthless and horrible. I don't know how those girls sleep at night, because
well,
they were
unfortunately,
horrible.
this is what we're training. I think the Liberal Party has made a decision that they want to train people to be like this. We're seeing other...
It's like a cult or something ridiculous.
That's right.
They're brainwashing these people.
It is. It does look like a cult. This is a scary phenomena, to be honest. I've never seen such poor conduct from people, let alone condoned conduct, in my whole business career.
It's disgusting.
So I'm shocked. I'm shocked by what I've seen over this campaign. I really am.
So what's it then going to look like? Like, is there any way that we can try and interrupt this? Like, is there any way that we can do something?
Well, it's like any organisation, Monica. People operate in an organisation based upon what the leader of the organisation or the tone that is set by the organisation itself. So obviously, the Liberal Party feel that this type of conduct of being misleading and deceptive right up to the top, which ultimately becomes the Prime Minister because he's the head of the Liberal Party, he obviously must condone misleading and deceptive conduct, and he must condone ministerial staff of the Liberal Party who are taxpayer-funded, harassing candidates during an election campaign. If he doesn't, then he should address it. But the tone of the Liberal Party and the way they're bringing up potentially future members of Parliament who are coming through their ranks, if they're training them and they're setting them on sick dog exercises,
Ridiculous.
like you're a nice groupie, what I'm going to do is, for your learning exercise, you are going to go and harass somebody
Seriously.
for the whole day.
Guys, they even harassed Peanut. Nobody
Don't harass a dog. Come on, Monica.
They did. No, you know what they were saying? They're like, that's animal cruelty. She's locked in a cage. And I was like, actually, she's a princess, but whatever.
Yeah, well, I think that's a bit over the top, but anyway.
So, with the stuff about Queensland then, what was happening there? Apparently they were the ones that stuffed it up or something or other with Liberal?
Oh, so the reason why the Liberal Party may have got in is because of the election results in seats in Queensland. So we have, obviously different states. Queensland is one of our states. That state produced a very unfavourable result for the Labor government, enabling more seats to be retained by the Liberal Party, if not gained or retained by the Liberal Party than what was expected.
So why didn't they vote differently?
There's probably two reasons, and it's really important. Again, we get around to the tip of the iceberg. One is obviously the heavy coal states. So in other words, they were, influenced by the coal argument that, Liberal Party argues that coal is good for humanity, whether you believe it or not.
Wait, how?
That's what they argue.
I don't understand.
Josh Frydenberg has said 10 times.
On the Great Barrier Reef. How can they not want to keep that or keep what's left of it around?
It's extraordinary, but...
that's how they've been brainwashed, basically.
No. If you look, there's a very good program by Michael West, if anyone wants to look at it. It explains the linkages between coal barons, which are people who own these large coal fossil fuel resources, the government, and effectively the large newspaper groups up there. So in that area of Australia, our media laws, well, this is again, the Liberal government changed our media laws, which meant that you could end up with whole areas of our country where there is only one proprietor of newspapers. So in other words, there's only one person or one type of newspaper.
Like it's only the Australian or only the Herald Sun or something.
That's right. That's it.
Okay.
That's it. And having that amount of
power
enables...
And someone is going to pay someone.
Well, no, but it enables you to actually constantly keep putting out a, propaganda or one view.
Right.
That coal is good for humanity. The coal is
good
for humanity.
But I don't understand
and all of our
anyone
jobs are going to depend
logically,
upon coal.
like we're all about common sense here when I'm talking about my stuff. How can anybody in their right mind go, oh, that makes sense, coal is good?
Well, Monica, I think you've got to realise from their position, these are real individuals who are fearful for what their future holds. They look around and they don't see alternative employment for them. They see that industry as the only industry which they can be employed. And if you don't have a government that wants to show them or provide any leadership or as to what awaits them in a clean energy future or an energy transition future, but actually is in bed with the coal lobby, which actually wants to continue to dwell on those fears, because if you can keep that population fearful, then they'll continue to vote for you to protect their precious coal.
People do whatever they want in fear. Yeah,
exactly. Then you won't get anywhere. And the Liberal Party has provided no alternatives to those people, knowing full well that if they ensure that people cannot see any alternatives, then they will continue to be fearful for their future and then they'll continue to vote for them. But it's a terrible position because it's bad for the environment, one, but ultimately coal is going to go and these people are going to be left stranded. And rather than have a a transition that occurs over a longer period, which is easier for people to adjust to and build new businesses and find new careers, they're going to find this transition will be more abrupt. Now, they'll think that currently for the next 3 years under this government that's now got back in, they may be okay for the next 3 years, but it's just going to mean the change is going to get more abrupt later. It's not as if this issue is going to go away. There is no magic solution to the fact that we cannot scientifically continue to be using coal.
Okay, so the Liberals in for 3 years.
Yep.
So that's fucked.
Another 3 years.
One. And then is there any way that we can make them leave before the 3 years?
Well, look, they haven't finished counting all of the seats yet. So there are still some seats in doubt. It could well be that the government...
Everybody let's manifest.
Yeah, it could well be that the government doesn't have a controlling majority.
Okay.
And they have to rely on the crossbench or the independents.
Okay.
And that's the reason why, again, independents will become critically important there. Yeah. And we have a number of independents who are saying they are not going to let the government welch on its climate change obligations. But I don't know whether they're going to be enough to actually stop inaction, because this is what this government wants. The government wants inaction because it enables people to continue to make a bucket load of money out of burning fossil fuels.
Fuck. So is there anything that, as in me and our listeners and just general society, can do right now? Like, is there any way that we can, like, have enough of people signing a petition to kick them out or something? Basically, we need you running the countries. So, like, what can we do?
Look, I think we need to let the polls. Yeah, I think we need to let the results feed their way through. Today is only the day after the election. I think people are all genuinely surprised about. I had
so many Instagram messages just being distraught.
Surprised about this result. I think it's a terrible result for our country. But you never know. One's never sure whether Scott Morrison, the Prime Minister, who says he believes in miracles, will actually produce a miracle and suddenly turn this around. But he will be fighting an incredibly embedded and entrenched force within the Liberal Party that Malcolm Turnbull couldn't overcome.
So wait, is Scott whatever Morrison, is he good or bad?
The answer is it wouldn't say that we are.
Is he for climate change or against climate change? Not that I'm like anybody can be against climate change,
but even for climate change, they don't appear. They look from where they are as if they're going to continue to take no action.
Right. Okay.
But you never know. He's a man of faith. He might go to church. So if you want to, you may want to kind of give God a petition. and tell him to send him a message. And if we couldn't do it through the ballot box, maybe it can come.
Maybe one day he'll just have like a dream one night then just change.
That's right. Maybe he'll get a message through another medium, and we've been all fighting at the ballot box, whereas we should have been going to church instead. But whatever works, we need something to work here, and we need something to work quickly. And I think a lot of us are afraid that it's not. And if it's not going to work, then you get to the stage where we'll head into questions of people undertaking acts of civil disobedience, which what does that mean? Basically means people actually taking action into their own hands, where they actually disobey laws on the basis that they don't believe those laws
are fair,
are safe laws.
Okay, right, gosh.
And that's not what we've had much.
No, that's a bit scary. We don't want people doing that either.
No.
Or like hurting themselves or hurting anybody else.
That's right.
Okay, so quick last thing. Asylum seekers. Somebody sent me a message saying, can you explain what's going to happen with our asylum seekers now that we are in this mess? Whilst we may be devastated here, I think the asylum seekers sitting on Manus and Nauru Island would be feeling even worse. They have been in an effective prison for over 8 years for wanting nothing more than a better life, and they got caught in a change in rules. In essence, the rules changed 8 years ago. It wasn't really rules, but effectively the door was slammed 8 years ago. They got caught in the slamming of that door, and the governments
have used them as advertising symbols to try and prevent other people from trying to come to Australia by boat.
That's disgusting.
So
when I was driving this morning, I was just thinking about this, and I was like, we still live in an incredible country. We're very fortunate, right? And I was just thinking, I could not imagine the fear that these people have to live in.
well, Monica, for 8 years they're nowhere, and
But they're an old country. Like, no wonder they flee.
I know, but regardless, they're caught in a limbo land where they don't know.
Which is horrible.
They don't know where they're going, and
So they're even
causing,
worse off.
Well, it's causing that we're actually hurting them. We are mentally damaging.
Oh yeah,
100%.
100%.
We have mentally damaged them, and the government is again taking no steps to deal with the situation. Both of these issues are immoral, and if Scott Morrison again is going to that his famous place of the church,
don't know what church he's going to.
well, no, man of faith, then he should realise the moral dilemma that there is here with this, and there should be no dilemma. What's going on with the people who are stuck on Manus and Nauru still after 8 years in nowhere land is flagrantly immoral and wrong.
So what were you going to have done if you got that seat in Kooyong?
Well, most importantly, we would have actually worked to put together a proper program which then became investable for business over the long term, provided a plan and a pathway on which we can reduce emissions. What business wants is certainty.
Yeah.
Business would have been happy with the Labor government because it would have locked in certainty.
Okay.
This government, even now the Liberal government, is at war in itself within the Liberal Party.
Okay.
And general rule is if you can't govern your own party, you're not in a position to govern the country. So we've now put in place a government that doesn't want to act on climate change. It doesn't want to set proper emissions targets and a pathway so business can invest with certainty. The government is at war within itself between its factions, and that was very evident before the election.
What are factions?
Factions, so basically within a party you tend to have different little groupings, little clubs.
Oh, little cliques, like
little
school,
cliques.
like schoolyard.
Little school cliques that they run around.
The popular kids, the bullies, the
that's right.
the nerds. Got it. Right. Okay.
Except these guys are unfortunately.
So they kind of do act like children, though. That makes sense. Okay.
Yeah. So they're at war with themselves. They kind of putting on a brave face to saying Scott Morrison will somehow unify them. Yeah. Again, if he can, great. I mean, you've got to look at this from a positive side and try and be positive about the outcome. But there's a lot of weight on the Prime Minister's shoulders to do something. If he fails, well, look, he just can't. He can't fail. He needs to fix this problem, and he needs to stand up to the influence of fossil fuels. He needs to address the asylum seeker issue, and he needs to put in place a more progressive and broad church Liberal Party, or otherwise this is going to be another mess for another 3 years.
All right. Okay. So last little thing then, what are some things that we can do either to help make some change in Australia and also, or whatever, to help our environment? We all know, do reusable cups, paper straws, blah, blah. That's all great. What are some actual things that we can really start doing?
Well, for most people, it depends if you're young. I mean, obviously, transport is a big use. Using public transport is a main sector. A lot of people talk about changing their diet a little bit, trying to have a little bit less meat. Yeah. But most of the problem with this is electricity, energy consumption, and the combustion of coal in old power stations. If you have an electricity bill, you should be making sure that the electricity is 100% renewable power and not dirty power, and talking to your retailer about trying to get a deal so that the energy you're using in your flat or apartment or at home is green energy rather than anything else.
Oh, so you can ask your energy provider.
Yeah, to allocate, make sure that the energy you're using comes from renewable energy resources.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah.
I didn't know that. That's awesome. Okay, cool. That's something we can all be doing then. Easy.
Yeah.
That's great. Okay.
And if I mean, I'd be interested if people find that there's a massive cost difference. I would be surprised.
Okay.
At the moment.
Yeah.
The cost difference should be marginal.
Yeah.
But it's something they should be demanding.
Yeah.
They should, because then, in essence, when they know they're at home and they're turning their air conditioner
I know
on
they're
or
not
heater
hurting
on,
the environment.
then arguably they're not hurting the environment. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. And like, what about cars? Are cars like I know cars are really bad for the environment, obviously, but are they the main problem?
No.
So what's the main problem? Is the coal, not the cars.
Exactly.
Right.
So what do you do with this whole thing?
I want to quickly ask you, and then we'll ask you about the Tesla because you mentioned. Yeah.
No. But so what you need to understand is you need to go from the high emission activities first.
Okay.
Yeah, particularly if you've got an economic alternative for them quickly.
What's that? Economic alternative?
So in other words, burning coal or using renewables. Renewables is cheaper than burning coal. So you should be moving to renewables as quickly as possible.
It's cheaper and better for the environment.
That's right.
Right.
But
Liberals don't like it. Okay.
No, well, the answer is the people who own existing power stations don't like it because you're actually threatening their power stations.
Are they the ones that also give the big donations?
Yeah, correct.
Right.
You're starting to get the gist.
Yes.
Here.
So basically,
I don't want policy.
That's
right. I don't want policies put in place or you to encourage activity, which means the product that I'm delivering, which is dirty power, is not wanted anymore because I can only produce dirty power and that'll affect my back pocket.
Yeah.
So I want to give you a bit of money in your pocket so you will do nothing to affect
So fucked up. Yeah. Right. Okay. I don't know how these people sleep. Okay. So let's all change our energy provider to like not energy provider, but ask our energy provider to change to green energy. Yeah. Okay, and then are there any other ways that we can be using green energy, buying green energies? You know what I mean?
Well, as I mentioned, you can ask your existing retailer, or there are some retailers that are...
Retailer, like shopping retail?
So the person who sells you your electricity, who provides
you
your electricity bill.
No.
There are a couple of electricity retailers which only produce renewable energy, which, for example, Tasmanian Hydro has a retailer. And
do you have to be in Tasmania to use that?
No, okay. I've got a retailer here.
Tasmanian Hydro.
And they'll provide you with all renewable energy because that's all they sell.
Amazing. Yeah. That's beautiful. Yeah. Okay, amazing. Thank you so much, Dad, for clearing some stuff up. Everybody, Dad's going to have his own podcast, which is he's going to basically be talking about these things, but in a less of a crazy jargon way.
Well, I'll try.
He'll try. Okay.
If you do it with me, then we'll try.
Yeah, we're going to try and do some episodes together so that I can be asking the quote-unquote dumb blonde girl questions that we don't understand.
Because, one of the things that I found quite striking is that talking to so many people over the last 3 months, obviously campaigning, is how real little depth of knowledge people have about our political process and how much misinformation they're exposed to. And,
correct.
And they don't really have a normal network to ask questions in.
No, it's all very confusing.
That's right. And it shouldn't be confusing. And maybe through this podcast, I'm very happy to get questions and try and explain them. I can be kind of like your boring dad if you want to. I'm not around a dinner table.
With Dad.
Yeah, that's right. But I can try and answer your questions for you that come through. And you don't need to be shy about asking them.
So, everybody, I'll pop Dad's links in the description so you can follow him on Instagram because I'm going to teach him how to, put up the question thingy like I do in my Instagram stories. So when he does different podcast episodes, he can answer your basic questions so that you can start to understand some stuff because I know that we don't like watching the news because it's just a lot of fear. However, we still want to be living in a healthy society, and right now it needs some TLC. So hopefully you got lots out of today's podcast, and I'll talk to you all soon. Thank you so much. Bye. Well, thank you again for tuning in and listening to my podcast. I hope that you got lots of nuggets out of today's show. Please, I would be really grateful if you could leave me a review so that more women can find the podcast and therefore I can help more women understand their period and fix their period problems. Because after all, it's a much nicer life to live when we actually love our cycle because we do have to keep up with it every single month. Also, if you have any friends or loved ones that you think would enjoy my podcast, I'd be super grateful if you could send it to them as well, just to share the love. And that's it for now, so I will catch you on the flip side. Have an amazing day or night wherever you are.